My name is Rachel Palmer, and I'm 37 years old. Just last week, I attended a professional gala where I was being honored for my work in research and education. It was a night I'd anticipated for weeks, a celebration of everything I'd built over the years, but as fate would have it, the moment I stepped into the restroom to catch my breath, I came face to face with someone I hadn't seen in nearly 15 years, my mother. She was standing at the sink, reapplying her lipstick, every bit the poised socialite I remembered. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she'd recognize me, but then her eyes flicked up to the mirror, locking onto my reflection. Her hand froze mid-motion, and I saw her jaw tighten. "Rachel," she said, her voice cool and detached, as if we'd run into each other at a country club instead of a restroom after 15 years of silence. "I didn't expect to see you here." I steadied myself, gripping the edge of my clutch. "I could say the same," I replied evenly. "What brings you here?" She turned to face me, her posture as rigid as ever. "Your father and I were invited." "Of course, we've always supported organizations focused on education." "And you?" she added, her tone laced with mild curiosity. "I'm being honored tonight," I said, meeting her gaze, "for my work in research." Her expression barely shifted, but I caught a flicker of surprise in her eyes before she masked it. "I see," she said, turning back to the mirror. "Well, I suppose everyone finds their way eventually." Her words pulled me back to the day I left that house for the last time. I was 19, and the years leading up to that moment had been anything but easy. In high school, I'd struggled with depression, but in our family, admitting that wasn't an option. "What could you possibly be sad about?" my mother had said when I once tried to confide in her. Her voice was dripping with irritation. "You have everything, more than most kids your age. Stop making excuses." But the truth was, I had been drowning. The pressure to live up to the Palmer name was suffocating. By junior year, my grades were slipping. By senior year, I was barely hanging on. My parents didn't see a teenager in need of help. They saw a failure, an embarrassment. When I only got into a community college, my father's fury was unmatched. "This family has standards," he'd said that night, pacing the living room while I stood clutching my acceptance letter. "And you've done nothing but drag us down. You want to waste your life? Fine, but you'll do it on your own." I was kicked out that night. I can still feel the weight of the duffel bag I carried as I left the house, filled not just with clothes, but the heavy reality of being completely on my own. My parents didn't even say goodbye. My mother remained seated on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if I were invisible. My father disappeared into his study, his ultimatum already delivered. For the first few weeks, I crashed on a friend's pull-out couch while I figured out my next steps. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I worked part-time at a diner to cover tuition and rent, scraping by until I could afford a tiny studio apartment. It was a grind, balancing classes, shifts at the diner, and the relentless voice in my head that whispered I was a failure. But for the first time, I could breathe, even if the air felt thin. That first year was a blur of late-night study sessions and endless shifts, but it also brought something unexpected: hope. I decided to study chemistry, partly because I loved it, and partly because I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe even to them, that I could excel at something difficult. It wasn't easy. My high school grades had been mediocre, and I felt like I was starting from behind. But for the first time in years, I wasn't crushed under their expectations. I could focus on learning. I still remember my first chemistry exam. I had spent weeks preparing, poring over every formula, every reaction, until I could practically recite them in my sleep. When the professor handed back the graded tests, I hesitated, terrified to look, but there it was, a 92%. I nearly cried right there in the classroom. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd earned it. That small victory felt like the first step toward rebuilding myself after everything had fallen apart. Over the years, I evolved in ways I never expected. College wasn't easy, but I learned how to work for what I wanted. The more I gave, the more I grew. By the time I finished my associate's degree, I wasn't just a student anymore. I was someone who had learned how to fight for her place in the world. When I transferred to a 4-year university, the obstacles didn't stop, but I had learned how to face them head-on. The shy, insecure girl who barely scraped by in high school was gone. In her place was someone who could stand in front of a class, explain complex concepts, and hold her own. Chemistry, which had once been a daunting challenge, became my passion. I didn't just want to pass anymore, I wanted to excel, to prove that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. While juggling part-time work, I also interned at local research labs, gaining hands-on experience that eventually led to a life-changing opportunity, becoming a lead researcher at a nonprofit dedicated to advancing science education. It wasn't just a job, it was a mission. I wanted to create a space where other kids, the ones who were told they weren't good enough, could find their way too. Graduating with my bachelor's degree was supposed to be a triumphant moment, but when the day arrived, I realized something painful. My parents hadn't even called, not to congratulate me, not to ask about my plans, nothing. My father, the owner of a massive fertilizer company, had more money than he knew what to do with. He and my mother lived in a mansion, hosted extravagant parties, and rubbed elbows with politicians and CEOs, but for all their wealth, they'd never taken an interest in me unless it was to criticize. Even after I graduated with honors, after working tirelessly to get where I was, I didn't exist in their world. To them, I was a reminder of their failure, an inconvenient blemish on their perfect lives. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that they'd at least acknowledge my hard work, but they didn't. It was as if I had never mattered to them. That realization hit harder than I expected. The only family member who came to my graduation ceremony was Aunt Lydia, my mother's younger sister. Lydia was the black sheep of the family, shunned for being too eccentric, but she'd always been kind to me. She was the one person who remembered my birthday, even when my parents pretended I didn't exist. When I saw her in the crowd, waving excitedly from the back, a lump formed in my throat. After the ceremony, I found her waiting in the parking lot with a huge bouquet of flowers. "You did it, kid," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you." It wasn't much, but it was enough. It wasn't the cold silence I'd grown used to. Aunt Lydia reminded me that family didn't have to mean perfection and that love could come from unexpected places. She didn't care that I hadn't followed the straight path my parents wanted for me. She cared that I'd made it, no matter the hurdles. A few months after graduation, while wrapping up a research project at the university, one of my professors, Dr. Collins, pulled me aside. He was an old-school chemist who spoke about the periodic table like it was poetry. He had noticed my work ethic and persistence. "Rachel," he said, his voice calm and thoughtful, "I've been in touch with some colleagues at Oxford University. They're offering a research opportunity in environmental chemistry, and I think you'd be a perfect fit." At first, I thought he was joking. Oxford, one of the most prestigious universities in the world? Me? But Dr. Collins insisted. "This isn't just a job," he said. "It's a chance to make real contributions to the field. You've earned this. Don't let fear hold you back." His words stayed with me as I filled out the application. I applied hesitantly, not fully believing it could happen. The process was rigorous, and I doubted I'd make the cut. But weeks later, an email arrived. "We are pleased to inform you that you've been awarded a research grant for your proposed work in environmental chemistry at Oxford University." I was stunned. Moving to England felt like stepping into an entirely new world. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my old friends. The only person who knew was Aunt Lydia. A few days before I left for England, I called Aunt Lydia. She was the only person I trusted with the truth. "You've worked too hard to let anything hold you back," she said, her voice steady and encouraging. "Do this for yourself, Rachel." She understood why I needed to disappear, to escape the shadows of my past and carve out a future without the weight of anyone's expectations hanging over me. I asked her not to tell anyone where I was going. I didn't want them to find me, or worse, drag me back into their world of judgment and indifference. So, with nothing but a backpack and a faint hope for a new beginning, I boarded a plane to Oxford. Settling into a tiny flat in the heart of the city, I threw myself into my work. The first few weeks were a blur of adjustment, the language, the culture, the isolation, but as I immersed myself in my research, I began to feel at home. I was part of something bigger now, working on projects that truly mattered, projects with the potential to make a real impact on the world. Chemistry was no longer about proving myself to my parents or anyone else. It was about changing the future. Over time, I completed my master's degree, and the momentum of my research carried me forward, driven by a newfound confidence. I applied for a PhD. The process was grueling, with sleepless nights and endless hours in the lab, but I was determined. I had found my place at Oxford, and I wasn't turning back. Years later, I earned my doctorate, establishing myself as a respected researcher in the field of environmental chemistry. The culmination of my journey felt surreal, especially when I was offered a position as a professor at the University of Cambridge. Cambridge, one of the world's most prestigious institutions. It felt like a dream I had never dared to chase, not because I didn't think I was capable, but because it seemed too far removed from the girl I had once been. At Cambridge, I found a new passion in teaching and mentoring, guiding the next generation of scientists. Sharing the knowledge and resilience I had gained brought me a sense of fulfillment I hadn't anticipated. Standing at the front of a classroom, commanding respect and attention, I often thought of the shy, uncertain girl I had been. That girl had grown into someone I was proud of. Still, a part of me sometimes glanced over my shoulder, wondering if anyone back home knew where I was, or cared enough to find out. My parents had never reached out, not a single call, letter, or email since I left. It was as though I had been erased from their lives. Did they ever think about me? I told myself it didn't matter. I had built my life without them, and their silence only proved how unnecessary their approval had been. But when I saw my mother in that bathroom mirror, the weight of our history came crashing back. Her dismissive words, "Everyone finds their way eventually," rattled in my mind. Did she really believe that? Did she even care about the years I'd spent clawing my way toward the future I had dreamed of? I thought about all the times they'd told me I wasn't good enough, about the cold silence when I left their house, and the years of absence since. It felt like a lifetime ago, but standing there, the bitterness was as sharp as ever. I had worked so hard, leaving everything behind, moving to England, earning my master's and PhD, becoming a professor at Cambridge, and here she was, treating my accomplishments like an afterthought, like they didn't matter, like I didn't matter. When she walked out of the bathroom, poised and distant, I felt a pang of something between anger and release. Watching her disappear back into the crowd, I realized how far I had come. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need their approval. I had built a life on my own terms, and that was enough. The gala began shortly after. The hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses filled the air as I tried to shake off the weight of our encounter. This was my night, the moment I had worked for, fought for. I took a deep breath and stepped into the ballroom, where my name was called. Rachel Palmer, honored for her groundbreaking contributions to education and sustainable chemistry. The applause was deafening as I walked to the stage. The lights bore down on me, illuminating the sea of well-dressed guests. As I stood there, the gravity of the moment hit me. This wasn't just about my work, it was a declaration to the world, to myself, and to anyone who had doubted me. I had proven that I was more than the girl my parents tried to mold and dismiss. I had become someone entirely my own, and that, above all else, was enough. This was it, the moment where I stood on my own, with nothing to prove to anyone but myself. As I tried to absorb the magnitude of it all, the host's voice rang out, pulling the room's attention. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting announcement," the host began, their tone brimming with anticipation. "In recognition of tonight's groundbreaking work in education and sustainable chemistry, a generous and anonymous donor has pledged a $2 million grant to the recipient of this award." The room fell silent, and I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me. My heart raced as the words settled over me. $2 million. The sheer weight of the number was surreal, almost too overwhelming to comprehend. This wasn't just recognition. It was a life-changing gesture of trust and belief in someone's potential. But it wasn't mine, at least, not officially, not yet. The host continued, "This extraordinary contribution is intended to support the recipient's continued research efforts and to further their impact in education." I blinked, stunned, as the words echoed in the room. The announcement wasn't directly for me, it was for the recipient of the award, whose name had yet to be revealed. Still, the atmosphere shifted, and I couldn't help but notice the charged energy in the air. This wasn't just an award, it was a transformation for whoever received it. As I tried to process everything, my gaze wandered over the crowd, their faces a mixture of anticipation and polite admiration. Then I saw him, near the back, beside the exit. My father stood up abruptly, his face twisted with something that looked like disgust. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Then he turned sharply and made his way toward the door, his movements swift and deliberate. He didn't even stay to hear my name. I froze. Anger, disbelief, and a sharp pang of bitterness rose in my chest. This was the moment I had dreamed of, validation for everything I'd worked for, an acknowledgement of my journey, and he couldn't even bring himself to remain in the room. The man who had rejected me, kicked me out of his house, and dismissed my dreams was walking away, just as the pinnacle of my success unfolded. The host's voice broke through my thoughts. "We are incredibly fortunate to not only have a generous donor for tonight's award, but also a longtime supporter of education and sustainable chemistry. This $2 million grant, made possible by Mosaic Fertilizers, is a testament to the power of innovation and dedication in advancing our field." Mosaic Fertilizers, my father's company. I felt the air leave my lungs as realization struck. The donor funding this grant, the crowning achievement of my career, was tied to the man who had spent years undermining my dreams. The irony was almost too much to bear. He hadn't known it would be me standing on that stage. His contribution had been anonymous, routed through the foundation. He thought he was funding someone else, someone he could be proud of. Instead, it was me. My chest tightened as I tried to keep my composure. The applause around me was deafening, yet it felt distant, like a dull hum pressing against my ears. I stepped forward to the microphone, managing a shaky, "Thank you." The words felt empty, too small for what I was feeling. As the applause faded, I couldn't stay. I turned and walked off the stage, slipping through the crowd and out the back door. My feet moved on instinct, my heart racing. I couldn't let this end like this, not with him walking away from the very moment that should have silenced all his doubts. Pushing open the door to the cool night air, I spotted him standing by his car. His back was to me, shoulders stiff with tension. My feet carried me forward before I could think twice. "Dad," I called, my voice cracking. He didn't turn at first. When he finally did, his expression was bitter, the same look I remembered from all those years ago. "What is it now, Rachel?" His voice was sharp, cold. "You think I'm going to congratulate you? Celebrate the fact that you're taking my money?" I stopped a few feet away, my chest heaving. "I didn't know it came from you," I said evenly, "and I didn't ask for it." He sneered. "No? Well, it's yours now. Enjoy it. But it doesn't change a thing. You're still the failure I kicked out of my house. No grant, no award will fix that." The words hit me like a slap, but this time, they didn't cut as deep. I looked him in the eye, steady and unflinching. "I don't need it to. I've built my life without you, and I'll keep building it. This grant isn't about you, it's about what I've earned." For a moment, he said nothing, then, with a dismissive shake of his head, he turned and got into his car. I stood there as he drove away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. That night, I made a decision. The $2 million grant wasn't my victory, it was a reminder of everything I had left behind. I donated the entire amount, every last cent, to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. They deserved a chance to create their own future, free from the burdens of judgment and expectation. As I pressed the final confirmation on the donation, I felt a quiet sense of peace. My father's money didn't define me. His approval didn't validate me. My legacy would be my own, and that was worth far more than any grant.